The game was worth it. When I was 15, I had a mole removed from my arm. That sentence sounds much more dramatic than it actually was. The mole wasn't causing any problems. It simply looked unusual enough that my parents and doctor agreed it would be better to remove it than spend years wondering whether we should have. The procedure itself was simple. A few stitches, a bandage, and some instructions about taking it easy while everything healed. Unfortunately, whoever scheduled the procedure failed to consult the girls' basketball calendar. We were in the middle of the season, and as far as I was concerned, that was the more pressing issue. I don't remember much of what the doctor said afterwards. I'm sure it was sensible. I'm sure it was medically sound. I'm equally sure I wasn't paying nearly as much attention as I should have been. What I do remember is that we were scheduled to play at Richlands High School in Virginia, and I intended to be there. Looking back, this was probably not my finest decision. At 15, however, I felt there was a significant difference between being injured and having stitches. An injury prevented you from playing. Stitches were merely a detail. If I remember correctly, nobody seemed nearly as confident in this plan as I was. My mom had concerns. The doctor likely had concerns, or he may not have known. My coach may have had concerns. I, on the other hand, had a game. So I got on the bus and headed to Richlands. Somewhere during the course of that evening, I did exactly what everyone probably expected me to do. I busted the stitches right open. At the time, this did not strike me as evidence that my decision-making process needed improvement. What struck me was that I was having a really good game. That felt far more relevant. The funny thing is that nearly 30 years later, I can still tell you who we played. I remember the bus ride. I remember the gym. I remember playing well. Most of all, I remember being glad I was there. What I don't remember is spending much time worrying about the stitches. And that's interesting, because if you had asked me then what part of the story would matter decades later, I probably would have guessed wrong. The wound eventually healed. The mole disappeared. The stitches were replaced. Because I had torn everything back open, the healing process didn't quite go according to plan, and a scar remained. You can still see it today. For a long time, I looked at that scar as evidence that I should have been more careful. Had I listened to the doctor, it probably would have been smaller. Had I skipped the game, my arm likely would have healed more neatly. Had I exercised a little patience, the outcome would have been cosmetically better. All of those things are most likely true. But age has a way of changing the questions we ask. When I was younger, I looked at the scar and thought about what could have been avoided. Now I find myself thinking about what would have been missed. Because the truth is, I don't spend much time thinking about the scar at all. What I remember is the game. I remember being 15 years old, climbing onto a bus with my teammates, and heading to Richlands on a winter evening. I remember the excitement of playing, the confidence that comes with youth, and the satisfaction of being exactly where I wanted to be. The scar is still there. The game is what I remember. The older I get, the more I realize that life keeps presenting some version of that same choice. Not usually with stitches, and thankfully not very often on a basketball court. But the question remains, do we participate, or do we spend our lives trying to protect ourselves from every possible consequence? Do we write the book even though it might be rejected? Do we start the business even though it might fail? Do we answer the calling before we can see the entire path ahead? Faith has rarely felt like certainty to me. More often, it has felt like stepping onto the court without knowing exactly how things will turn out and trusting that God is already present in the outcome. That doesn't mean every decision ends perfectly. Sometimes the stitches break. Sometimes plans change. Sometimes things leave marks behind. But I have come to believe that a life spent entirely protecting itself eventually becomes a very small life. The stories we treasure most rarely come from the moments where we stayed safely on the sidelines. They come from the moments when we showed up, participated, risked something, and trusted God enough to take the next step, even though we couldn't control what happened afterward. What strikes me now is that the entire story began because we were trying to get rid of something. The goal was to lose the mole. That was the problem everyone was trying to solve. And in that respect, the procedure was a complete success. It is gone. It has been gone for nearly 30 years. What nobody explained to me at 15 was that sometimes losing one thing means gaining another. I lost the mole. I gained a scar. And somewhere along the way, I gained a memory as well. The older I get, the more I think many of life's losses work that way. We assume the goal is to lose something and return unchanged. We want to remove the problem, close the chapter, and move on exactly as we were before. But God rarely seems interested in leaving us exactly as we were. More often, something leaves and something else arrives in its place. Sometimes it's wisdom. Sometimes it's perspective. Sometimes it's a relationship, an opportunity, or a calling we never would have discovered otherwise. Again and again, life asks us to let go of one thing and discover what arrives in its place. Some of those exchanges make sense immediately. Others take years. This one took a while. For years, I thought the story was about the scar. Now I think it was always about the game. All these years later, when I think about that night in Richlands, I find myself asking the same question that has followed me through so many seasons of life. Did I really lose anything at all? Or did I simply trade a blemish for a scar for a story, and a story for a reminder that life is meant to be lived? If given the chance to do it all again, I suspect I would still get on that bus. Every single time.